Before we round up with the watch series page, I want to stick off two things. First of all, remember we need to fire the AJAX request once the user completely watches a video, and next we want to just display a watching icon right here to make sure that we know that this is the lesson we're watching. And finally, I want us to put a tick right here or a check to show that this user has watched the series or not. And for us to do that, when the user completely watches a series, we need to fire an AJAX request to our server, preferably a post request, to complete the series. Now, we don't yet have a test for the feature, but we already have a test for the unit, okay? Because in our unit user test, we are testing that a user can complete a series, which is successful, but we need to create a feature test so that we test how the AJAX requests are fired. That sort of thing. Okay, so let's create a new test. PHP artisan, make test, and this is going to be watch series test. And like we agreed, this is feature. Okay, so we'll head over to our watch series test, and the first test we're going to be writing is test a user can complete a series. Test a user can complete a series. Okay, so how do we want this to work? We need a user, right? And then we need a series. And that series should have like maybe 2 lessons, if I suppose. And then we're going to fire a post request to our server to complete the lesson. Okay, maybe the first lesson. Okay, then we're going to run some assertions. Maybe assert that the lesson has been completed in our Redis store, and then maybe assert that we have a particular response from our server, and then maybe assert the status of the response. Okay, so let's start with our user. User equals, we'll create a user with our factory. So user class, and we'll call the create method to persist that. Next, we need a series and 2 lessons. So we'll create a lesson, persist that, and we'll create another lesson, which will be lesson 2 for the lesson class. And we'll make sure that we specify that the series ID should be 1. Okay, so it belongs to the first series. Okay, now we need to make the post request. Our post request is going to be this post, and we have to decide the endpoint. So I'm simply going to say let's go to a series complete lesson endpoint, and we'll need to take in the identifier for the lesson, which will be lesson ID. So in this case, we are completing this lesson, so we pass in its ID in this string. Okay, and then we are not going to be passing any data to the server. We just want to complete this lesson, and that's all we need. Okay, and we already have the authenticated user. We can get the series for this lesson in the controller. Okay, then what we want to do is, first of all, run our assertions. And actually, if you don't love running your assertions inline as such, and you want to keep the order of the way we planned out, you can save this in a variable. So response equals this, and then assert that the status was a 200, and then you can also assert JSON to assert that we received a particular structure of response from our server, and would say the status should be okay, right? And then finally, we want to make sure that this lesson has been saved to our Redis store. So why don't we do this? This assert true, and then we'll call our user, and we'll call a has completed method, has completed lesson method, which takes in lesson, and we are going to check if it's true. And then for our own security, let's call exactly the same method for lesson 2 and assert that it's false. Okay, so everything works like we think it does. Okay, so we've called complete lesson for the first lesson, but the second lesson is not completed, so we should assert that it's false. Now we don't have this method, but don't worry, we're gonna go step by step and actually make that happen at the end. Okay, now let's run this test. First of all, before I run it, let me use the user class, and finally the lesson, and actually flush Redis because we're going to be using Redis, and finally use my refresh database trait. Okay, we're good to go. Let me run that. PHP unit, now filter to this test. Okay, that's our first test. Expected 200 but received a 404, and 404 means this URL does not exist, right? So let's head over to our web.php and create a new route would say route, and remember we want it to be a post, and we want it to be series, complete lessons, and we want to take in the identifier lesson right here. And we're using lesson because automatically Laravel is going to inject the lesson class into our controller, right? Then we'll match this to watch series controller at complete lesson. Okay, let's run that test again. Okay, we received the 500. If you want to see what that error is, in your test, you just need to disable exception handling. So this without exception handling. Run it again. And now we have a cleaner error. Method complete lesson does not exist. Therefore, we'll go to our watch series controller and we're going to create a complete lesson method. So public function complete lesson, and we are taking in the lesson right here. Okay, so let's run this one more time, and we have invalid JSON was returned from the route because we're not returning anything, and automatically actually this was a successful response. That's why this was kept. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to complete the lesson. So we'll just call our authenticated user and we'll call the complete lesson method and we'll pass in lesson. And we've already tested this method using our unit test, so we know it works. So for us to pass the test, we need to return a response with a JSON, and we need to pass in a particular JSON which is status okay. Right, that's all our method is going to do. Let's run that one more time, and now we have an error talking about complete lesson on null. So call to remember complete lesson on null, which means we don't have an authenticated user, right? So what we should do is make sure that we log in this user, and we'll do that by calling this acting as user. Okay, run that, and we have call to undefined method has completed lesson. Now this is the part of application that is breaking because this successful, this was successful, and now we are using a has completed lesson on our user method which is not defined. Let's hit pause for a moment, take care of this error in the very next video.